At 1:14 in the morning on the 4th of July, a warning went out across the Texas Hill Country that almost nobody heard. By sunrise, the Guadalupe River had risen 26 feet in 45 minutes, and one of the deadliest floods in modern American history had already happened, in the dark, while an entire river valley slept beside the water. This is the story of that night, hour by hour, and why nobody saw it coming. Before we start, if this is the kind of story that stays with you after the video ends, take a second to subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. And I want to know one thing while you're here. Have you ever camped, floated, or fallen asleep next to a river you trusted completely? Drop it in the comments. Now let's go back to the evening of July 3rd, 2025. There is something about the Guadalupe that makes people want to sleep next to it. It is not a big river. Through the hill country west of San Antonio, it runs shallow and green over limestone, clear enough in places to count the stones on the bottom, narrow enough in places to throw a rock across. Cypress trees lean over it. Kids floated on inner tubes. For 100 years, families have built cabins on its banks, and summer camps have lined it shoulder to shoulder. By 2025, Kerr County alone held 19 of them. And that is the first thing you have to understand about this night. The people along the Guadalupe were not reckless. They were doing what generations before them had done. In the exact same spots, in the exact same cabins, some of them nearly a century old. Camp Mystic, the all-girls, Christian camp near the little community of Hunt, opened in 1926. The same family had run it since 1939. Roughly 750 girls were sleeping there on the night of July 3rd, some of them in cabins that sat just yards from the water. But the hill country keeps a secret under all that beauty, and hydrologists have a name for it. They call this region Flash Flood Alley, arguably the most flash flood-prone landscape in the United States. The reason is the ground itself. Steep hills, thin soil, and beneath that soil, solid limestone that soaks up almost nothing. When heavy rain falls here, the land does not absorb it. It sheds it, funneling every drop downhill into narrow river valleys like water poured into a stone gutter. The locals know this. Kerr County's own leadership would later call the Guadalupe the most dangerous river valley in the United States. In 1987, a flood on this same river caught a church camp evacuating near Comfort, swept a bus and a van off the road, and killed 10 teenagers. That flood set a benchmark on the river gauges that stood for nearly 4 decades. The night of July 3rd, 2025, was about to erase it. Here is the cruelest part of this story. On the evening of July 3rd, the sky gave almost nothing away. Families grilled dinner, campers sang songs. At Camp Mystic, the girls went to bed on schedule. The state's lieutenant governor would later put it bluntly. There hadn't been a drop of rain before the tragedy struck. But high above central Texas, something rare was assembling. The leftover tropical moisture from a storm that had crossed Mexico was being pulled north into the hill country, where it collided with a slow, spinning pocket of air meteorologists call a mesoscale convective vortex. Think of it as an atmospheric drain that refused to move. Instead of a storm passing over the hills, the storm parked and regenerated over the same watershed, hour after hour, wringing tropical ocean levels of moisture onto thin soil and bare rock. The National Weather Service saw the danger building. In the afternoon, a flood watch went out. Then, at 1:14 a.m. on July 4th, forecasters escalated it to a flash flood warning for Kerr County, the kind that triggers alerts to cell phones, weather radios, and broadcast stations. The warning said Life-threatening flash flooding was expected to begin shortly. It even carried a grim footnote: most flood deaths occur in vehicles. That alert did exactly what it was designed to do. It just did it into a void. It was past 1 in the morning on a holiday. Nearly everyone in the valley was asleep. Phones were off, silenced, or charging in another room. Parts of the river valley around Hunt sit in cell-service dead zones where alerts simply never arrive. Many camps kept campers away from phones entirely, and Kerr County, after years of debating it, had never installed outdoor warning sirens along the river. The cost had always been the sticking point, so the most important warning of the night landed in a valley with no way to hear it. The county judge would later say it plainly: "We didn't know this flood was coming." Upstream, in the dark, the rain gauges were starting to record numbers that seemed like typos. Some spots in the watershed would end up receiving over 20 inches of rain, roughly 4 months of hill country rainfall, delivered in the space of a night. All of it was now sliding off the limestone out of 100 draws and creeks into one narrow river. The Guadalupe began to rise. At Camp Mystic, the camp's 70-year-old executive director, Dick Eastland, was awake. He had a home weather station, and sometime after 1 in the morning, with more than 2 inches of rain already down, he got on the walkie-talkie with his family. First, it was practical things: get the canoes up, secure the equipment. The river was rising, but rivers rise here. Whether he ever saw the 1:14 in the morning emergency alert is a question his own family later said they could not answer. By around 3 in the morning, water was covering the camp road. The lowest cabins were starting to flood. Eastland began moving girls, cabin by cabin, loading them into a vehicle and driving them toward higher ground, working in the rain and the dark. And this is the moment the river stopped behaving like a flood and started behaving like a wall. Between roughly 4 and 5 a.m., the Guadalupe at Hunt rose 26 feet in 45 minutes. Read that again: 26 feet, 45 minutes. That is a 2-story building of water, arriving in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom episode. In the Hunt area, the total surge ran closer to 29, 30 feet, and it came as a leading wave. Survivors described a wall of water moving down the valley in the dark. The river gauge at Hunt recorded the rise, and then the flood destroyed the gauge itself. The instrument built to measure the river became one of its first casualties. At 4:03 a.m., the National Weather Service escalated to the highest alarm it has: a flash flood emergency for south-central Kerr County, including Hunt, flagged as a particularly dangerous situation. By then, the water was already inside the cabins. What happened at Camp Mystic in the next hour is almost unbearable to describe. Cabins that sat in the river's mapped floodway, ground the county itself had labeled extremely hazardous, took the full force of the current. Girls climbed into rafters, onto trunks, through windows. Counselors, most of them college kids with no emergency training and no radios, made decisions in waist-deep water and pitch blackness. Dick Eastland loaded a group of the youngest girls into his SUV and drove for higher ground. The water took the vehicle. Data recovered later from the car and from his own watch showed it struck a tree and went into the Guadalupe. He died trying to get them out, a man who had spent his life telling nervous parents the camp was the safest place he knew. 27 campers and counselors were lost at Camp Mystic that night, most of them children. And the wave was not done. It rolled on downstream through the dark, through RV parks, campgrounds, riverfront homes, toward Kerrville, where the river would crest at 37.5 feet, more than 15 feet above major flood stage, the second highest level ever recorded on the Guadalupe, past the mark set by the 1987 flood that everyone had treated as the worst case. The whole catastrophe, the rise, the wave, the drownings, was substantially over before civil dawn. Many people along the river died without ever knowing a warning had been issued. The sun came up on July 4th over a valley that had been rearranged in the dark, cars in trees, cabins gone to their slabs, and hundreds of families who did not yet know what the night had taken. What followed was one of the largest rescue operations in Texas history. Helicopters worked the valley all day. More than 850 people were pulled to safety, over 100 of them plucked off rooftops and out of trees by air. At one point, 160 people were listed as missing in Kerr County alone. Over the following weeks, searchers and investigators whittled that list down to a handful, as most were found alive, and the dead were counted. The final numbers place this among the deadliest inland floods in American history. More than 130 people killed across central Texas, the overwhelming majority of them in Kerr County. And the reckoning that followed has been just as heavy as the flood. Investigations found that Camp Mystic's counselors had no emergency drills, and the camp lacked a required evacuation plan. Lawsuits were filed. State lawmakers moved to tighten camp safety rules. The camp itself declared bankruptcy and withdrew its license application rather than open the following summer. And Kerr County, after decades of deciding sirens cost too much, watched the state move to overhaul flood warning across Flash Flood Alley. When another major flood pushed down the same valley a year later, in July 2026, warnings went out early. Evacuations happened in time, and the mayor of Kerrville said out loud what everyone was thinking: accurate warnings, delivered in time, save lives. So here is what this story is really about. Not the rain. Rain that heavy is rare, but it is not new. The Guadalupe has always been two rivers wearing one name. There is the gentle one, the one you can wade across in July, the one families have trusted for 100 years, and there is the other one, the one the limestone builds in a single night, that arrives as a wall at 4 in the morning. The people of the hill country were not foolish for loving that river. Every one of us sleeps next to something we've decided is safe because it was safe yesterday and the day before, and every day we can remember. The lesson of July 4th, 2025 is written in the gap between 1:14 in the morning, when the warning went out, and the moment the water arrived, a window of almost 3 hours in which nearly everyone who was about to be in that river's path was asleep, unwarned, and unafraid. 26 feet in 45 minutes. The river did not do it in secret. It did it in the dark, which, for almost everyone in that valley, turned out to be the same thing. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves a river, and tell me in the comments, what's the body of water you grew up trusting? I read every one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.